Absolutely. So we are going to nerd out about how design thinking is the best methodology for hiring talent for organizations, because it focuses on the human, right, the candidate, but it also really ensures that we're meeting the business needs. Absolutely. So design thinking is a methodology that you use when you're trying to solve a challenge, a problem, trying to find a solution, and you want to focus on the audience. So who are you actually solving that problem for? So you're really trying to gather insight about them, then be able to create ideas that would actually help solve that problem. Be able to, you talked about prototyping, being able to find that quick, easy way to show how that solution might work, be able to get feedback on that, be able to understand if it's going to work or not. If it's not going to work, fail fast, right? So that you're not failing in front of your audience. And then be able to take the solution that works, implement it, but then do the iteration piece, which is all about continuing to evolve that solution. You got to ask for feedback. You got to, learn from your audience, and you have to do it yourself. So if you haven't applied to your own jobs, if you haven't gone through your own interview process, if you haven't taken the time to truly see the candidate side, to get that empathy going, you're never going to have good candidate experience.
Welcome to the Improvement Nerds podcast, where we host conversations about the things that nerd us out with one goal in mind: sharing best practices and sharing techniques and tools that allow us to make lasting change. In each episode, we'll feature a different idea, and hopefully through that episode give you a set of new tools, new skills, and new thinking that'll allow you to change how you do your work, how you lead others, and how you show up in your life. We're so excited that you've chosen to nerd out with us. We hope that these episodes are exactly the things that you need to hear in order to get started in making the improvements that you want to see happen in the world. If these episodes speak to you, please subscribe to our podcast, like what we're doing, and leave a comment.
They have difficulty even doing that change management to be able to move forward. And unfortunately, a lot of times, I think that happens a lot in human resources. It's hard to change because they want it to be perfect. If you even look at, if you talk to people who are in a business and they ask about their HR person, they literally assume that HR person's perfect. They do everything right. They know all the rules, all the policies. So there's this high expectation of HR professionals to do it right and get it right the first time. And so a lot of times that will put fear into wanting to iterate, wanting to experiment and try things. And that's the problem. We don't bring our authentic selves to work. We can't, right? You have this facade that you put on, and I did it all the time when I was in corporate HR. There was a facade. I wasn't allowed to go to the happy hours with my hiring managers. I wasn't allowed to kind of break free and have fun and show my horrible humor that I have. I had to kind of be prim and proper, and I had to sit correctly. I mean, at one point, I sat at the front desk, and my manager would be like, "Jodi, stop slouching. You have, literally, it's like I couldn't even have a bad day. You couldn't have a bad day in front of them. But if you would go into the closed door conversations with the HR people together, you got to see the true HR people. You got to see that we made mistakes, that we didn't know what to do all the time, and that but that wasn't allowed to be seen in front of your customer. It's an interesting one. But yeah, we are fun and we are inquisitive and we want to learn stuff, but it's just, how can we do it and feel comfortable doing it in front of our stakeholders? Because we are in front of our stakeholders at all times.
Margaret Mead said it best when she shared that one should never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, that it was the only thing that ever had. I couldn't agree more. Let's get busy, Improvement Nerds. We got a lot of work to do. Alright, Improvement Nerds, before we jump into this episode, I have a huge favor to ask of you. Over the last year, I've had a lot of fun and I've learned a lot in creating these podcasts, and I'm committed to keeping them going. But to be honest, I'm one person, and I'm trying to grow this podcast and my small business at the same time. And in order to keep my energy high and to stay excited about these conversations and this journey ahead of me, I need your support. And so do several other small business owners. I don't know if you know this, but the best way you can show a small business support or the podcast support is to first subscribe to that organization's podcast or to their newsletter. Going beyond subscribing, the next thing you can do is to like their content. If you find the content specifically engaging, leave a comment and contribute to the dialogue. If you want to go one step further than that, share the content across your social media platforms and help us reach a larger audience. Look for other activities that organization is participating in. I don't know if you're aware of this, but outside of the Improvement Nerds podcast, I have a website called thegreendotgroup.com. On that website, I feature a variety of improvement tools and training that will help individuals equip themselves with the skills, the tools, and the thinking they need in order to make and lead change. To support small business, visit these people's websites, check out their resources, and if you see value in the services that they provide, enroll those services. Or if you know of an organization that would benefit from that small business's services, forward that information on to that individual to help them out. Running a small business is a complete joy. It gives the individual creative freedom to produce content that is meaningful to them and to meet others that are passionate about the same things they are. But for all that passion and all that excitement, don't underestimate how hard the work is to create success as a small business owner. Behind the scenes of a small business, it's often one individual who's pouring themselves into that business to make it happen. And just like any other person who walks this earth, that individual has their limits. Some days there's good days where the energy is flowing and creating content and growing your business just works. And then there's other days where it's hard to find the motivation to put in the effort. You guys, as Improvement Nerds, pour a lot more energy into my business than you know. And I cannot thank you enough for that. Now let's get to the episode. Hey, Improvement Nerds, this is Tom. I'm back with another episode of the Improvement Nerds podcast. Today, I'll be welcoming my guest, Jodi Brandstetter. Jodi is the author of the best-selling book on Amazon, and we'll talk about the categories that this book has been featured in. And that book title is Hire by Design. So talks about two passions of mine, which is ensuring organizations have a vibrant workforce and the talent they need to execute their mission, and design thinking. So two things that I love nerding out about. So this episode was bound to happen. So I'm so excited to have Jodi join me today. Welcome to the show, Jodi.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, man. And we're Zooming together, and you're calling in from what part? I know you're from Ohio. So what part of Ohio?
Yeah, so I live in Loveland, Ohio, which is a suburb of the great Cincinnati, Ohio, known for our wonderful Bearcats. Go UC.
Oh, okay. Well, you might have. I wish I was more fluent in sports. I went to Indiana State, which had a successful basketball program in like 2000, and that was really the only major milestone outside of Larry Bird. So like I can never, say go trees because it just didn't intimidate anybody. So I just kind of gave up on sports altogether after my college days.
I actually graduated from University of Evansville, and we really had no game, I guess. But last year we had game for one game, which was when we defeated UK, and that was pretty big for us, Purple Aces. So, but my husband went to UC, so we're pretty big fans of UC's football and basketball, and my daughter loves their volleyball team. So we are all about UC Bearcats.
Oh man, well, it's great to have a team like that in your backyard and to get to cheer for them. I didn't know you. So we're connected through the Missouri Valley Conference then, because both of us,
Yes.
our alma maters, competed against each other in the MVC.
Hmm.
So okay, well then this conversation's over because we're once we compete as college students, we just compete for the rest of life. So awesome. So I'm going to set the stage. I already kind of talked a little bit about the book and the two core topics of um, acquiring talent and design thinking. So I imagine those are two of among many things that we're going to nerd out about in this episode. But I want to kind of let you introduce, that topic and just kind of give us the elevator speech of how this came about and what it is. And then, of course, we'll circle back to that and we'll do a deep dive on it. So I want to give you the chance to kind of set the stage about what we're going to nerd out about.
Absolutely. So we are going to nerd out about how design thinking is the best methodology for hiring talent for organizations because it focuses on the human, right, the candidate, but it also really ensures that we're meeting the business needs. So it's going to be a huge nerd out about just hiring, design thinking, empathy, experience, all that fun stuff.
Oh man, I can't wait. This is an important topic in our current climate. And I know in your book you talk a little bit about the climate, so I'm sure that's going to be something that comes up as we do our deep dive. So I'm going to have to put a feather in the cap, and we can't just jump in and start nerding out on topics because then I'll forget to go through your introduction and get your background. So I'm going to sit on my hands and we're going to let you talk a little bit about your journey and how you came about authoring the book, how you came about being passionate about this topic, and where you see things going next.
Absolutely. So, like I said, I'm actually a Hoosier that lives in the Buckeye State. So I transitioned over to Ohio right after I graduated from college, the good old University of Evansville. And I had a passion for human resources right away when I was in college and immediately was drawn to recruiting and hiring. Of course, most people like that part because it's the nice part of HR, right? We get to make offers, we get to have people start. It's not employee relations, it's not boring like compensation. So really, kind of was very focused on hiring, recruiting, and HR when I graduated. And so I started my career placing temps, like most new grads wanting to get an HR start as, and kind of worked my way up from placing temps to working at Sallie Mae, which is the student loan company. And I was hiring collectors, which is not super fancy. Most people don't like it, but it actually is a fun, fast-paced job because we were hiring about 15 to 20 people every 2 weeks. So it was definitely a learning process. From there, I decided I wanted to get more experience in other parts of hiring. So I transitioned into hiring inside sales for a local organization here in Cincinnati, and then went back to staffing so I could gain some knowledge of IT recruiting. Was there for about 3 or 4 years and really got a really nice in-depth knowledge of recruiting itself, as well as IT and other parts of the business I've never recruited for before, and ended up being a boomerang and went back to Sallie Mae. That grass always greener doesn't always work all the time. I actually really enjoyed my time at Sallie Mae the first time, and they had a role that was really cool. I was really excited about. I was going to get to help manage a relationship of the business and the RPO that they were using to hire. And I ended up managing the RPO out and then developing a team, an internal team, to do all the hiring for a couple of their subsidiaries. And then from there, I decided that I wanted to go out on my own. I wanted to take all this knowledge I received through my career and really be able to provide it to small to mid-sized companies here in Cincinnati. And that's when I decided to find my consulting company, which is Lena Effective Talent Strategies, LETS for short. Our focus is helping companies with developing a hiring blueprint with design thinking. And then I also have a second pillar of my organization, which is talent acquisition evolution. And that's how I'm able to stay on top of trends, continue to learn, because it's all about connecting with other TA folks to be able to learn, connect, and work together. And so I've been doing that since 2018. And in 2020, I decided to write a book pre-COVID pandemic, and stuck with it during the pandemic, and decided to create a book about design thinking and talent acquisition, because I really felt like this was an avenue that a lot of companies weren't utilizing, was a methodology to create a strong hiring process. And design thinking is the best, in my opinion, methodology to do that. So wrote a book about it, and published it in September. And like you said, it became a bestseller. And here we are today.
I love the journey and the energy, talking about all the experiences you've had from undergraduate. Did you study HR, or did you study maybe psychology or social work? What was your undergrad in?
My undergrad was in management. That was the closest degree to HR. So that was where I could actually take some HR classes. I started off in finance and realized that was not my cup of tea. And I realized that by actually having I know, shocking, realized that because I got an internship in HR. I was told right when I graduated high school that you had to get an internship as quickly as possible. And so I got the first internship I could, which was at a local hospital. And it was in their HR department, which I thought, great, I can look at job descriptions and I can figure out what finance position I wanted. Got there and was like, I don't like finance, I like this. So decided to flip my major from finance to management.
Yeah, I am glad that you went in and were open to experiencing a career before completely plugging in with a degree that's hard to change after you graduate. So internships, yeah, it's great resume builder, but it's also an experiment in some ways to make a decision about, is this work I can be passionate about? So that's why I encourage people to intern, is to kind of test the waters, and get that exposure, that experience, and talk to people who are doing the work, and get that input to make a more informed decision as to whether or not this is what I want to do. Now, there is a caveat there, because if you intern somewhere and they leave a bad taste in your mouth, and it potentially could have been work you really would have loved, that's risk there too. But nonetheless, you should, in any career transition or any effect, when you're trying to make a decision, try to experiment with it. And that, that's of course an element of design thinking, is ideating and prototyping, is you cut your teeth on it, fail fast, fail cheap, and learn as much as you can in every experience that you're given.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do encourage people to do internships too, especially outside of what you think you want to do. You might learn about a culture of an organization that you love or hate, right? I mean, I did so many interviews at financial advisor firms, and I realized I was like, oh my gosh, no, I do not want to be a salesperson trying to sell my friends and family my capabilities as a financial advisor. That was not for me. And that was really kind of the route that a lot of my peers in finance were going, and realized, yeah, this isn't for me. And HR seemed to be where I really enjoyed. I was able to be analytical, but then also be able to work with people. And I think that's what, kind of really excited me through that internship. And I did have an amazing internship coordinator. Her name's Suzanne. So I'm going to give a shout out to her, because I'll make sure she gets this, because she was a great mentor for me throughout my time there. And I ended up interning with them every semester from my sophomore year to my senior year.
Oh man, that's awesome. So we've got school, internship, and then your career track, a lot of different experiences and industries in that. And thanks for sharing those things. I want to get to your design thinking certification and where you were first exposed to design thinking, what your initial impressions of it were, because some people, when they are presented with this methodology, they're like, well, that's all fluff and kittens and puppies. So I want to know what your initial impression was. And then, you're deciding to enroll in and get certification on it. So talk to me a little bit about how design came into the picture for you.
Sure. So when I started my consulting business, one of the things they tell you when you become an entrepreneur is you have to have a niche. You have to have something that makes you different from your competitors. And what I had decided my niche was going to be was I was going to work with a methodology, and that was going to help me build really strong processes for my clients. And there's, all kinds of methodologies out there that you can use. I've worked in IT, so I knew about, project management certification and Lean and Six Sigma, and there's all these, options. And I just started doing some research. I Googled like everyone else does and started looking at methodologies. And I found design thinking. And first, it just sounded really interesting to me. It really, had that focus on the person that, that was my whole career. I focus on people. So it just seemed like that made sense. And then I kind of just looked at it for a minute and kind of pushed it to the side. I was busy, with working. I had clients, thankfully. And then I went to a conference. I was actually speaking at a conference. It was HR Southwest down in Fort Worth. And there was a design thinking session. And I'm like, here it is again. Maybe I should go. And so I went to this session, and she did an amazing job. And it was all about brainstorming, coming up with new ideas. She had you partner with somebody and kind of bounce your ideas off of each other. And I left that going, okay, I have to take this more seriously. This looks like the methodology that I should be focused on. So then I started doing my due diligence on how can I find out more about this? What are different avenues I can go to learn about design thinking? University of Cincinnati actually has a design thinking certification. So I reviewed that. I reviewed some of the online universities that have, like MIT, I think had one that I was looking at. And I started looking at IDEO. And so there's so much that comes in play, right? When you're going to do some courses, you want to make sure it's going to be interesting, that it's going to be something that you get done in the time that you want it to be done. Cost, especially when you own your own business, is super important. I can't spend $20,000 on a certification at this point in my career. And so I really kind of looked at all those different pieces, and I kept going back to IDEO. I really liked that it was through a design firm that actively uses design thinking in their business. And I felt like if I'm going to learn a methodology, I need to learn from people who use it today in their work. Nothing bad about going to like a college to learn it, but I just really felt like I would grasp the information more. I would have more stories, more case studies to learn from. And it was online. They had like an intro to design thinking course that was like $99. I'm like, let's do that, see what I think. Love the format. Love that you got feedback from your peers, that you were able to provide them feedback. So it just really fit what I was looking for. And so then I just dove in and started taking the classes. Went with the basic certification, and then I went ahead and went with the advanced certification as well.
Because you got to be able to deem yourself a nerd, right? You got to
absolutely
got to take it the extra mile.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. I have 2 HR certifications. I am a nerd, I love this stuff. Like, I love learning. I love being a part of like conversations about interesting topics. So I felt like, if I'm going to do this, I'm going big or going home, right? So I went big.
Yeah. I had a buddy in college it was typically not for good, but sometimes in troublemaking, he would always say, if it's worth doing, it's worth doing right. And so, like mischief. Like he would do it in regards to mischief, but I adopted that for my career and, even some of my credentials and things that I pursued was, I would be smart about it. Most of that was my wife balancing me out because I'm kind of like, oh yeah, like, I'm just going to go big. And she's like, well, maybe you should, test the waters a little bit. So, going through the certifications to become a belt was something that, I wanted to accelerate. And she's like, no, like, enjoy this journey, go through the introduction and get feedback and make sure this is something that you want to invest more time and energy on, and then scale up from there. And that sounds like that was your runway too, is you were excited and probably could have jumped right to the very tippy top, but it's probably someone who was pulling you back a little bit, like, I get your excitement and keep your excitement, but let's, maybe go about it at an angle to where you're not going to burn out.
Yeah, my husband does that for me a lot because I have a lot of big ideas that I like to just go for. And he usually has to be like, can we just talk for a minute? Like I found this great way of learning about podcasts. It costs a lot of money. I was about to dive in and just jump for it. And he's like, have you tried to do it yourself yet? And I'm like, maybe I should do that first before I, invest this money. So yeah, he's my bounce. He's my board I bounce ideas off of, or at least gives me some clarity or time to kind of think about stuff before I do.
I could sense that in our planning call and even in this conversation that you and I are kind of kindred in that we're ready to run before we even know how to walk in some ways.
Yes, absolutely.
So, kudos to your husband and to my wife and anyone who plays that role for people like us. You keep us safe.
And also, please be nice to them because it's a lot of energy, I think, that it takes to be with, probably, at least with me. It takes a lot of energy and a lot of patience. So, whenever you see those people, you just give them a high five or a beer, whatever they need. Just make them happy. That's what I do.
Yeah. So thank you so much for kind of walking us through your journey and sharing with us a little of your personality. I love the energy that you have for life in general. I mean, yeah, we're hitting on this topic and I could see it's just it creates a lot of joy for you, but I feel like just in general, that's how you live your life, is just try to enjoy it and have a lot of positive energy about it. So thank you for bringing that energy to this topic and to my episode. And even beyond that, just being a role model to people, but like, hey, like, amp it up. It's okay to be excited about stuff, and don't hide that energy, but wear it on your sleeve and share it with others. So thanks for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I get sad when people aren't excited, or they don't show that passion, or they don't show that energy. Like I'm all about trying to get people to that other level of energy, or at least get them excited about something.
Yeah.
That's how I live. Like I need to be excited.
So I think we're going to be able to create some excitement for our listeners around the methodology of design thinking and the way that you have adopted that methodology to talent acquisition, and that crossroad, that intersection of those two things, and some of the magic per se that's happening there. So let's go through and do a little bit of a deep dive on the topic of design thinking in the talent acquisition space. And I think you talked initially, one of the things that got you super excited was that design thinking, the methodology, is focused on people and based on empathy with a goal of creating exceptional experiences. So I can totally see the fit. And I want to talk with you about your book, about some of the case studies, about some of the research you're doing, about some of the trends and stuff that kind of highlight why design thinking works so well in the TA space. So you ready to jump in?
Let's do it.
Awesome. So I kind of want to just really quick, because it's in the book, you talk about what is design thinking. So you talk about the methodology. So I think we owe that to the audience, a quick snapshot of what it is, and maybe educate them a little bit on it.
Absolutely. So design thinking is a methodology that you use when you're trying to solve a challenge, a problem, trying to find a solution, and you want to focus on the audience. So who are you actually solving that problem for? So you're really trying to gather insight about them, then be able to create ideas that would actually help solve that problem. Be able to, you talked about prototyping, being able to find that quick, easy way to show how that solution might work, be able to get feedback on that, be able to understand if it's going to work or not. If it's not going to work, fail fast, right? So that you're not failing in front of your audience. And then be able to take the solution that works, implement it, but then do the iteration piece, which is all about continuing to evolve that solution. We are humans, we evolve, we change, our environment changes, just like with the pandemic. Like if any company was still doing all face-to-face final interviews in April, they probably didn't have a lot of candidates, because that's not where we were as as a group of people with the pandemic going on. So evolving it, changing it, tweaking it, constantly looking at it, saying, is it still working, is I think probably one of the biggest pieces of design thinking that businesses should be kind of wrapping their heads around.
I agree that iteration is essential, and that's a part of a lot of the improvement methods to go through. It's kind of enlightened trial and error in some ways, is changes upon us, and we don't have time to design the perfect solution to respond to this change, but we know we need to start doing things a little bit different. So it's the safest, most reasonable first step we can take to experiment and learn, and based on that learning, take the next step and the next step. And I think organizations that suspend change because they want to plan it out and get it so that it's so perfect oftentimes never change, because perfect really doesn't exist.
No, they have difficulty even doing that change management to be able to move forward. And unfortunately, a lot of times, I think that happens a lot in human resources. It's hard to change because they want it to be perfect. If you even look at, if you talk to people who are in a business and they ask about their HR person, they literally assume that HR person's perfect. They do everything right. They know all the rules, all the policies. So there's this high expectation of HR professionals to do it right and get it right the first time. And so a lot of times that will put fear into wanting to iterate, wanting to experiment and try things.
I'm glad you brought that up, because empathy for the end user and understanding their motivators and their beliefs is really important part of the design thinking process. So you shared with us somewhat of a persona of an HR professional. Is there's the expectation of being perfect because one, that person's customers oftentimes require it. So the employee themselves, or a hiring manager, or even the customer of a regulator, because we know HR is regulated. So, we have this persona, an HR professional who wants to do things perfectly, and that in some ways helps them be successful, but it also can make them be slow to change. So I think you saw, okay, we've got this catalytic event that's challenging HR to innovate, and a large majority of HR professionals, their persona types are to be perfect. So they're going to be slow to respond. They're going to be anxious. They might be fearful. Design thinking is a way to help them change and actually bring their playful spirit to their work. Because it's in there. HR people, when they're not at work and they're at a conference or they're at the barbecue, they cut
we are
loose.
Fun people. We are so much fun to hang out with, and that's the problem. We don't bring our authentic selves to work. we can't, right? You have this facade that you put on, and I did it all the time when I was in corporate HR. There was a facade. I wasn't allowed to go to the happy hours with with my hiring managers. I wasn't allowed to kind of break free and have fun and show my horrible humor that I have. I had to kind of be prim and proper, and I had to sit correctly. I mean, at one point, I sat at the front desk and, my manager would be like, Jodi, stop slouching. You have, literally, it's like, I couldn't even have a bad day. You couldn't have a bad day in front of them. But if you would go into the closed door conversations with the HR people together, you got to see the true HR people. You got to see that we made mistakes, that we didn't know what to do all the time. And that, but that wasn't allowed to be seen in front of your customer. It's an interesting one, but yeah, we are fun and we are inquisitive and we want to learn stuff, but it's just, how can we do it and feel comfortable doing it in front of our stakeholders? Because we are in front of our stakeholders at all times.
Yeah, you're definitely got a life of on stage, off stage as an HR professional. And I work a lot in healthcare. So you have nursing and physicians, very risk adverse, obviously, because a mistake on their part oftentimes could lead to harm or poor quality of care. So they themselves have created a very natural resistance to change, because change equals risk and risk equals potential breakdown and failure and harm to a patient. So of course they dig their heels in. Now they're not like that as humans, but they are as professionals, because the processes they perform and the customers they serve require them to. So HR and healthcare, in some ways, a lot of people are like, oh, slow to change. Well, please look at their work through their eyes, and they're resisting simply because, not to be jerks or to be pains in the butts. A lot of people perceive that, but that's not true. They're really resisting because they see it as advocating for their customers and trying to keep them safe. And then when you bring design thinking into that space, you can actually let that person let their hair down a little bit and practice empathy and to innovate and to be excited about stuff. And it's so cool to see teams of people who oftentimes get the perception of resistant or stick in the mud, and you bring these tool sets into them and they are on fire. They're super energetic. Their passion is tangible. It's so much fun to see teams use design thinking, because it really does make connections.
And it's also a safe place to do it, because you are prototyping. You're not putting it directly in front of your consumer, your audience, your employees, your candidates. So it does give a doctor or an HR professional or anyone who sees high risk in changing that stage to be able to change, to see, well, what does that do? How does that impact what I'm doing? And then they can really start playing with that to really find something that's going to work.
All right. I think let's step off our soapbox. I think we've convinced our listeners that design thinking is a powerful tool to bring about creative energy to teams that need to change, either out of desperation, so abruptly a catalyst has happened and they've got to respond to it, but also there's change out of aspiration or inspiration of, we want to be the best, or we're looking further down the road and this is a strategic move. So design thinking fits in either of those contexts. Whatever is pressuring a person or an organization to change, design thinking is your ally in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about some of the cool stuff that you've seen happen through use of design thinking in your clients or in your studies. Let's talk about some of that, the work that has unfolded in front of you. And I love some of your case studies, because when you tell these stories, it's like, here's what they were thinking and here's where they potentially were going to go. And that's a giant, puddle that they might have stepped off on, or a puddle of water or a pile of dog dew. Oftentimes they've got their assumptions, they're playing it really safe and conservative, and they think they're doing the right thing. But had they acted on that, they would have got themselves in big trouble. And then, so you kind of talk a little bit about that, but then you talk about the outcome that was actually occurred when they applied the design thinking principle. And it's like a 180 oftentimes from where they thought they needed to make the change to where they actually ended up making change. So let's talk about maybe one of those 180s that have happened with one of your client organizations or one of your case studies.
So I did a case study, and it's still in the process because I started it and COVID happened. But it was a 180 for me personally. And I like telling personal, like I have a lot of case studies that I found like through IDEO. They have amazing case studies, by the way, where you can see a lot of aha moments. And I do use a couple of those in my book. But one that I had personally was when I started really wanting to understand the communication process for candidates. I have seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. I know as a candidate, getting ghosted sucks. I know as a recruiter, getting ghosted sucks. And I also know that there's times where an email is not acceptable, a text message might be, or you need to have a phone conversation. So I was really starting this study on, okay, I really want to understand what candidates want from communication. And I was going by it as in, what step do they want what? So I was really focused on, is an email okay? The whole, chatbot type feel, is that something they want? So I was really going by that. And so I met with 4 candidates, and then COVID hit. So I met with 4. And I started asking questions around that. And then I really kept the conversation pretty open. And what I actually found out was it wasn't really the type of communication or how they communicated. At this point in the world, candidates just want to know their status. They just want to know, are you still wanting me to continue this process or not? And that's where I think my aha moment came, was I wasn't really thinking about just updating them. I was trying to think of the end communication. And really it was like, oh, wow. So what you're looking for is just an update. So if I have no update, you just want me to tell you, I have no update for you. Still in the process, but I got nothing for you. And they're like, yes, if you tell me, I'll wait if I want the job. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I need to kind of rethink about this. Like, how I communicate is definitely very important, but we need to find tools or ways to keep them updated as far as like a status. So and I even asked, does that have to be for me as the recruiter? And they're like, no. I'm like, can I do a bot? Like, could I literally have a bot where they can look at your your profile in my applicant tracking system. If it still shows that you're being considered, but you haven't moved to any new step, that they could just then say, you're still in the process, but no update. Would that make you happy? They're like, oh my God, that would be amazing. And I'm like, oh, okay. Like, again, it was just like this, my brain is a recruiter brain. I look at it in a recruiter mindset whenever I'm doing this. So, design thinking makes you push out of that and look at the candidate side. And so that was kind of this is a 180. Like, I'm not looking for, these are the steps you want a recruiter to do. I'm looking at recruiters, give them a freaking update. If it's no update, we're making a decision tomorrow, or we want to schedule an interview with you, whatever it is, just give them an update. And it looks like they want updates either, depending on the role, usually within a couple of days, or it could be, within 2 weeks. So there's definitely some wiggle room there too, so that you're not having to update them daily, but they're just wanting to know if they're still in the consideration. It's kind of like, so what you're telling me is I still got a chance, so that was like one aha moment, and I'm still working on it, still trying to figure out, because I still think there's definitely something that needs to be done with the communication tool for different parts of the process. But then also, what are some ways that we can keep that status going that's going to work well for the candidate as well as the recruiter?
That is a perfect example, because you were, from a design perspective, you were committing, the crime of trusting your own assumptions or your own fallacies or your own bias a little bit too much,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that, in any role, you are simply moving forward and acting on your assumptions and your own beliefs and your past experience of the things work, right? So that's how we as people get stuff done. Whether you're a decision maker, an individual operator, you're like, here's what I see, I know exactly what this is, and I'm going to react to it based on past experience, and I'm just going to move forward. So you were simply reacting to the problem of communication based on your past experiences of channels. What are the best communication channels? Like, so you were thinking technology and process. You weren't thinking from their perspective, which is, those things, yes, that are important, the channels by which information comes, but to the candidate, the real problem for them was the anxiety of not knowing and the potential risk of accepting, because I've applied to work, so you don't apply to just one job. You
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes have multiple interviews and offers occurring concurrently, and shuffling those things or knowing where you stand with one organization versus another, you, in the back of your mind, you're like, I need to work. I have financial responsibilities I've got to meet, and this work, I would enjoy it, but my dream job is that one,
Yeah.
and I know it's super competitive, and you know what, and then your naysaying comes in, and you're probably like, I haven't heard anything from them. I'm not good enough to work for them, and you make these decisions to give up on your dream and play it more safe, and you probably could have waited it out a little bit longer had you had the insights to say, hey, we think you are a good candidate. We are moving you forward. It's just taking us some time to get you scheduled for an interview or to verify your background, your education, your references. Like, that
Yeah.
statusing is important to them because they're trying to manage potentially multiple offers at once. And it happens all the time, and it's a good thing that it happens, because when opportunity presents itself, it's oftentimes multiple opportunities at once, and that's a good thing because now you have a lot of choices, but it's also a bad thing because you have a lot of choices. So your
Mm-hmm.
180 was, oh my gosh, what does it feel like to be this candidate and not know, and potentially go down a road that will make you happy, but there was another road that could have made you happier. So
Yeah.
your solution is kind of helping them navigate that space.
Exactly. And, as a recruiter, one thing I always did during my conversations with candidates, I would ask them, are you applying other places? Are you interviewing? And if they said yes, I would say, hey, if you get to a point where another opportunity is coming, but you like ours better, give me a call. And I was putting it on the candidate the whole time. And I didn't even think about their thoughts and their feelings. And honestly, I don't know if I would call me and say, hey, I got another offer, but I like you better. I mean, it's almost like dating, right? It's not like you have two guys that you're trying to date. You like one better, but the other one's moving a little bit faster. You don't go to the other one and say, hey, I like you better. Would you like to connect a little bit more? You don't do that. So I thought I was doing the right thing, but I wasn't. I should be the one updating them. I should be the one having that conversation. It's my job. So I think it was definitely a big aha moment, and it seems so simple, but for when you have a mindset on a certain way, and you have those assumptions, you have those biases, even those little shifts can be aha moments for you.
Yep, very eye-opening, and I think your story that you had just shared a little bit about dating, that's another really important part of design, is to design by analogy, is to compare what your problem is or what your goal is to a similar but slightly different scenario, in that gives you different context. And you talking about that did that. And the scenario I always saw on YouTube or in our big conferences when I worked in healthcare was, what if
healthcare was like a restaurant, like those
Mm-hmm.
they're very funny videos in which, you know, you go in and you want to get seated to have a meal and they can't tell you how long you're going to wait. And then you get the menu and there's no prices on the menu. So you know, in some ways it's insulting and but also funny because it's really accurate. And I think your story of this is kind of like dating. It's kind of insulting, it's kind of funny, but it's also really accurate. And I think in design, when you bring in those analogies, it's that in itself is eye-opening too. It's an important part of the process.
Yeah, actually, one of my favorite ways to do ideation is the mashup, where you take two completely different things and you mash it together. And in my book, I did interviews and dating because it is so similar, but not. And I actually saw one case study on IDEO specifically about healthcare and taking kind of the hotel experience of a hotel room and then of a patient room and ensuring that it kind of has that same experience. So one of the simplest ideas I remember from that case study was putting, you know, a little refrigerator in there so that their patient guest can have a soda or a drink, or make it easy for them to be able to spend that quality time with their loved one in the room versus having to go somewhere to get something to drink, or, you know, just little things like that that you can compare to industries that are different, but kind of have that same, there's something similar about them that you can actually kind of take pieces from and implement into your own space.
Yeah, and that is called blue ocean strategy. And there's a lot of examples of organizations that apply that. And that's what you're trying to do, is say we've got these two perceived independent circles, but really they overlap. So I think one of the classic organizations that have been effective with blue ocean strategy is Cirque Soleil. So you have people who love ballet and dance and you know, orchestra and music, and then so that's, you know, somewhat conservative and low energy and calming. And then you have the circus, which is risky, daring, and dangerous, right? And those two worlds, they lived separate of each other. And Cirque Soleil brought them together and found that middle ground to where they can provide both through their experiences. And it's very unique. It's have you been to a Cirque Soleil show?
I have. So I was going to say they also brought Michael Jackson back to life through their Michael Jackson show. So I've seen the Michael Jackson and I've seen the Beatles show. And I think that's also something that's so useful to think about too, is that they're taking this group of people who love a specific genre or a specific band, who would usually go to a rock band, right? Like a concert for it. And they're showing them this amazing talent within that circus feel. So yeah, I totally can see that within that organization. But if you haven't seen the Michael Jackson one, I'm not sure if they're still doing it, but they had, what is it called? Like the, gosh, why can't I think of it? They like put him on, they did not a 3D, but
like a hologram?
Yes, a hologram of Michael Jackson at the end. So you literally felt like you were there with Michael, you know, and it was just so cool to see that experience and be able to kind of see Michael Jackson after he passed away. But you got to experience his music and all this beautiful, you know, creative, amazing dancers and artists performing.
Yeah, so we watched Love when we went to Vegas, and we are talking about something that isn't tangible just yet, with, you know, because we're in the pandemic, and I don't know. I want to go to Vegas, but I don't know if it's quite safe to go yet. So we've wet people's palate to go see a Cirque show, and they just can't do it. So I think we owe them something that is more tangible, and I will tell them Pringles is also a blue ocean strategy in some ways. So what they did is they took everything people hated about potato chips and did it just slightly different. So, you know, instead of a bag, which results in broken chips and crumbles, Pringles decided to do the opposite of a bag and create a canister, which protects the chips, but it also takes up a lot less space on the shelf. So they can get more SKUs because there's a lot of Pringle flavors out there, and it takes up 1/3 of the shelf space that, Lay's does. And I like Lay's. The other thing people hate about chips is they're fried and they're greasy and they're not healthy.
Yeah, your fingers.
Yeah. So, that's oftentimes something that turns people off. Well, Pringles are baked. And then the other part is, the size difference. I don't know. I was one of 5 kids. So my brother, who's the biggest and strongest and oldest, he'd get the bag first and he'd eat all the big chips out, right? Well, that's the one thing I hated is I was always get the leftover chips, which were small and they weren't really good for dipping. Pringles, the chip size are homogenous. So, that there's, when you look around and the things you consume and the experiences that you really get a lot of value out of, it's likely that it was derived from the design thinking process.
Yeah. And I think people don't really understand how old design thinking is and how those concepts have been around. I mean, you think about Pringles. Now, I'm not sure if this is exactly true, and I could be completely making this up, but I'm pretty sure that one of my ex-boyfriend's grandmothers helped invent Pringles. She did at least the soft batch cookies. She worked at P&G. So you think about it, like, yeah, that was in high school, and I haven't been in high school for some time now. But yeah, here's like a great example from, 40, 50 years ago that we could be looking at and moving forward with.
Yeah. Yep. That it's not new. I think that's the one thing that was surprising about it. And also a lot of people were resisting it because of its newness and it wasn't proven out yet. So they're like, how would this work for us? No one's using it, or it's not been around long, or it's not been tried, or it's not reliable. None of those things are true. It's been around for a while and it's doing great things. So you need to, organizations or leaders or operators or whatever, you need to get on board before it's too late.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
So, and I think that's, in some ways, I'm assuming that was one of your motivations to writing the book and also coming onto this podcast, was to get people excited and leave them with a call to action to learn more about it and to find ways to use it in your organization, to reach out and partner with consultants that are using it and can help shepherd you and your journey as you try to bring it into your organization. So I don't want to put words in your mouth. What is there any other call to actions that you want to leave the Improvement Nerd audience with? Obviously, buy your book, right? Yeah,
well,
buy
please,
the book.
Please buy the book on Amazon if you like. I would appreciate that. But I think a couple of call to actions that I have when I think about my clients or my peers in talent acquisition is, one, don't make assumptions. You got to ask for feedback. You got to, learn from your audience, and you have to do it yourself. So if you haven't applied to your own jobs, if you haven't gone through your own interview process, if you haven't taken the time to truly see the candidate side, to get that empathy going, you're never going to have good candidate experience. So you have to be willing to take the time and to, go through that process. Go through potentially journey mapping. That's a really cool way to learn about your candidates and how their thoughts and feelings and actions through each step of the process. I'll go ahead and do a shameless plug. One of the things I do is hiring blueprint, which is just like a service blueprint, where you take that journey map and you build out the processes, the technology, and who's doing what. And that really helps you see your whole process as a whole. And it also helps you get buy-in for things that you might need or want to put into that. So technology or getting the buy-in from your marketing team to actually help provide content for you, whatever that is, this is a great way to be able to show it and be able to say, these are where we're having issues, here's our bottlenecks, and if we get X, Y, and Z, we can improve it, and it's showing that business case, which is what your businesses look for when you're trying to ask for more money. So yeah, that's it. I'll stop now.
huge, humongous. I am such a believer in mapping. Like it's one of the foundational improvement tools. And I'm glad you've said like, hey, that's a call to action is get out there and map. And for me, I'm very visual. And when you said that you did what everyone does when they are curious about something, they just Google it. So when you Googled it, to learn more about IDEO and to go on this journey like that, there's tons of amazing resources out there. So I'd encourage maybe another call to action is to be curious about this, to get out there and do some Googling. And for me, I like to Google and then go to Google Images because I love to look at pictures. Oh man. So just this is gonna kind of definitely cement that you and I are nerds, because I guess you do this too, is I'll Google customer journey maps and I'll go to Google Images and I'll just look at them, and they are so compelling, the stories that these things tell, and with no training whatsoever. Obviously it takes a little bit of training to create these beautiful things, but no training to consume it and interpret it and quickly see, oh my gosh, well, we can make a change here, here, and here. So that I think that was a great call to action, is to get people to start mapping their processes from the outside in, from your customers' perspectives in the form of a journey map.
Absolutely. And I actually just created my own journey map template. So if anyone wants it, and I also have a hiring blueprint template, I'd be more than willing to share that with them so they don't have to start from scratch, because you really have to take that customer journey map and flip it to a candidate journey map. So there's different phases, there's different ways to kind of look at what you're doing. So I'd be more than willing. I'm totally someone who loves to give. So if someone wants those templates, just reach out and I will give those to you.
Awesome. So let's get your contact information so the Improvement Nerds can find you and take you up on that offer. What are some of the best ways people can get connected with you?
Absolutely. So I am on LinkedIn, so you can find me there. It's Jodi with an I, Brandstetter, Brandstetter. That's 12 letters. And yeah, it's super long. Try to have a 5-year-old try to write that for them. And then I'm also, you can shoot me an email at Jodi@Let's, L-E-T-S, Cincy, Cincy.com. And then, feel free, I'm on Twitter. I'm trying Twitter. I'm learning Twitter. I've been on Twitter for it feels like 20 years and I'm just now learning it. And I'm Jodi _recruiter if you want to find me there.
Awesome. And I'll make sure I put all those things in the show notes so that people can find you. I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. And thank you so much for taking time today to nerd out with me. And I can't wait to see how people respond to this episode.
Yeah, thank you. I've loved it too. It's been so great talking to someone that I feel like has a very similar mindset and loves two of my favorite things too.
Awesome. I've had a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you.